All right, this is a brief introduction to all the parts you should have in your laboratory notebook. You should print this out. It's on the line, follow along, and make sure that you highlight these things because this is what you're basically graded on. It's an important document because when you do pass the AP exam, it shows the quality of lab work that you've done. No one really asks you for it typically, but you never know. So you should always kind of keep it neat and organized and a record of all the labs. Before you arrive in the lab, you're going to have title, problem, and procedure should always be completed. The data table should always be constructed so data can just be entered in. That's one of the key things having it. Now, other things that happen or you need to be aware of, before you leave the lab, all data and observations should be filled in and recorded. Basic calculations can be completed, but really after the lab, complete calculations are done later, and then the conclusion. So, a couple key procedural things you need to know. First thing is, I would suggest you use the lab book that is available in the Shark Shop. If you use a regular comp book for your lab, you will have to Xerox every lab that you turn in. It's kind of a drag. Your name and front cover, and your name and your class period should be in the front cover. You always write in ink in your lab notebook. You'd number all the pages. First 2 pages of the lab notebook are always going to be table of contents. Each time you prep a lab, make sure you place the title, page number, and where it starts in the table of contents. You only write in ink, blue or black ink. You basically do not write in pencil, only if you have to do a quick graph and finish it later. If you make a mistake, you do not basically erase. You draw one line through it and continue. Of course, there's going to be errors. That's basically how you deal with the errors. A couple other key things. You do not include the first person and personal comments in your lab. All sections must be labeled in your lab notebook. All sections that you always put in there of a lab should be labeled. That should be very easy and clear for me to find. We do not number the contents of our lab write-up. We title them. Each section has a title. Okay. And let's talk about the specific sections. We go here. Here are some specific sections. Title needs to be descriptive. You can't just say experiment 5. Well, you can get it right from the lab sheet. It'll tell you what the specific title is. Date, this is the date the lab was performed. Obvious. Purpose is a one-sentence statement saying that what the objective of the lab is or why we're doing it. It should be a complete sentence. Pre-lab. Pre-lab questions sometimes will go in your lab book, but most of the time they'll actually be handed in separately. I grade them separately, so don't typically include that in your lab notebook unless I ask you to. Procedure. You're given a procedure. It's a brief description of what you did. Very, very simple, not too detailed. Do not include lengthy, detailed directions. Really, you're just basically doing a quick overview of what you did. Listing all chemicals and any equipment. Then you get to the results section. We talk about results. You have 3 sections. You're going to have your observation section, which during the lab, you basically state anything that you see, any kind of changes that occur, that goes in the observation. That goes under qualitative data. The other type of data is really basically when you arrange measured values in tabular form. You must use a data table. You must use units of measure. That's the biggest mistake most chemistry students make, is they don't list units and they don't put it in tabular form. Every data table has a title. Anytime you calculate answers, you would show the mathematical operation. We'll get to that when we get to calculations. You must use a ruler for all data tables and graphs. Do not hand draw a data table or graph. It looks terrible. All axes and graphs should have a title and the units listed. Okay, calculations. Anytime you do a calculation, you must show the formula, then with the units, then plug in the numbers. Always. You always want to title whatever the calculation is so I can find it very easily. Demonstrate the math setups including units. Label what's being calculated. Make sure it is organized so I can follow it. Show error calculations where appropriate. That's in the next section. All right. Here we go. Then we get to the conclusion. When you go to the conclusion, it's very simple. It's a simple statement, whether or not you met the purpose of the experiment, really. Did you achieve it? Did you calculate the heat of a reaction? Did you calculate the molar mass of a gas? You know, and then basically, how was the purpose of the experiment fulfilled and how were you able to do it? Very quick and brief. Discussion of theory. This is where you explain what theory or what the purpose was from a chemistry standpoint, what concept was illustrated in the lab, what did the calculations show, did the experiment work? If in the gas lab you're trying to find the R, the gas constant, were you able to calculate it? So be detailed with it. Make sure you ask for help if you need it. Another section is experimental sources of error. You discuss possible sources of error, whether your error was larger than the actual value or smaller. Instrumental and human error basically exist in all experiments. Significant digits, really, you don't count. If you can calculate percent error, make sure that you do. You should know the formula for percent error. If I give you an actual value, definitely in the error section, you would definitely address or calculate the value. Any post-lab questions? Post-lab questions are answered in the lab. Make sure that you answer them so that it's very obvious. You want to make sure that you're very specific when you answer the questions, and that would be the end of the lab write-up. The lab write-up is done directly in the lab notebook, so it doesn't require any extra work. And then if you use the one from the Shark Shop, you have the tear-out pages, and you would just submit it, and you'd be good to go. Biggest pet peeves, neatness. Make sure there's enough space. Do not crunch everything together to get it fit on one page. Makes it harder for me to read. Make sure that every data table and every graph is labeled, has the units on there, and it's very specific. You have to be very specific, neat, and label everything. If it's not labeled, I'm not going to look for it to grade it. The purpose of this is for you to do really well on a lab. If you keep in mind what you're graded on and you focus on that, getting the grade that you want should be no trouble, but realize I am picky about how you show your work, labeling, using a ruler, everything we talked about. All right?